The South African National Council for the Blind's 43rd Quadrennial Conference wrapped up in Cape Town this week. This year's theme centered on changing the face of being blind, bringing together key role players of government interest groups, provincial and national member organizations. Well, the conference has indeed become a platform for highlighting pertinent issues that affect the blind and partially sighted persons, paving the way to a more inclusive society. Well, for some feedback on the conference, let's chat to Mr. Lesibana Movundlela, chairperson of the council. He joins us now from our Sea Point studios. Good afternoon, sir, and thank you so much for your time on the SABC News Desk.
Good afternoon to you and to all the viewers.
Well, changing the face of the blind was this year's theme. Tell us what that theme means to you.
What it means that visually impaired people in South Africa have potentials. In actual fact, we wanted to show everybody that visually impaired can do what is there to dream. Because they are faced with a number of challenges. We want to change those challenges into successes. I can talk about the issue of triple challenges that visually impaired are experiencing. The challenge of inequality, the challenge of unemployment, and the challenge of poverty. Most of them find themselves in those. So what the theme was to make sure that we change that into positive. If you can check, most of them are unemployed. Most of them are unemployed, and our focus was to come up with strategies and plans to make them become employable. We're now in the era of technology. So our technology has progressed to such an extent, it enables us as visually impaired to access a lot of things. So we focused on the recent developments on technology and how can visually impaired benefit from there in terms of them being employable, in terms of them participating more meaningfully on education. We know that education is also an opportunity to open up opportunities for visually impaired. So we want to make sure that they participate actively in their education in order to access those scarce resources, those scarce qualifications or those scarce skills so that they become more employable. Previously, you would find that visually impaired are not able to do maths and science. But because of this new technology, visually impaired are now able to then enroll in those qualifications that are regarded as scarce and critical. And those are the areas that visually impaired will then be able to be employable and get employment.
How enabling or how friendly to the visually impaired are some of our tertiary institutions or institutions of higher learning in the country right now?
Currently, I would say it's easy to get admitted at a university. The only challenge that I could indicate is at the TVET college. Most of the TVET colleges are not accessible. For visually impaired because they are not transformed enough to admit visually impaired students. However, we are working with the Department of Higher Education to make sure that more and more visually impaired get admitted at those TVET colleges. Why I'm saying this because it's not everybody would go to university.
Yes.
It's not everybody would go to university, so that's why we're working with the Department of Higher Education to get those visually impaired, slowly but slowly, to get access to those TVET colleges. The campaign of free education at universities and TVET colleges has made it very possible to visually impaired to study. But let me mention that visually impaired historically have valued education a lot, because if I check, we have a lot of visually impaired who managed to go to university, and I can mention a lot of them. We have professors now, we have doctors now in South Africa because of the value to education.
All right, I just want to try and understand, when it comes to the challenges in the TVET colleges you're speaking of, where is the actual problem? Is it actually the course material or the reading material that's not perhaps available to visually impaired in Braille perhaps, or is it just a matter of access?
No, mostly it's a wide range of issues. The attitude of the officials, the staff at the TVET colleges. Some of them haven't yet changed their mindset. They are not oriented enough, and most often you find that even if when they are supposed to be admitted at the TVET colleges, most of them, they doubt whether they will make it at the TVET college. But most importantly, you find that the TVET college are not transformed enough in terms of getting support systems. Support systems, I'm referring to things like adaptive technology. Adaptive technology, we're talking about computers, braille printers, and many other assistive devices that visually impaired would need for them to perform well at their studies. Again, the other challenge is the challenge of materials, as you said. You find that because those TVET colleges, they are not transformed enough, they don't have assistive devices, as such it becomes very difficult for learning materials to be available with ease for those visually impaired to study. And that makes it very difficult. Adaptation of some qualifications, adaptation of certain courses, so that it becomes easy for visually impaired to study. Those are some of the challenges. But I think slowly but slowly, I can give an example of Limpopo. Since this year, more and more visually impaired have been admitted to the TVET college. And working together with the Department of Higher Education, we've been able to identify certain TVET colleges where we encourage visually impaired to go enroll there. And with the partnership that we have, we are hopeful that more and more of them will be able to enroll with ease, and as the South African National Council for the Blind, working together with our member organizations like Sancb, South African National Association of the Blind and Partially Sighted Persons, we are hopeful that we'll get more and more students to enroll at those TVET colleges.
What are the job prospects of these visually impaired graduates who leave our institutions of higher learning? And did you get any feedback at the conference from these young people themselves and how they actually experience the workplace and integration within the workspace, Mr. Mavundla?
No, what they said, yes, we reflected. We actually had a commission that that was dealing with unemployment and employability of visually impaired. A full hour was dedicated to that, getting together those who are interested in that. What we found is that employers out there, they would prefer to hire a partially sighted person. They're not that much comfortable to hire a totally blind person. Most of them would say, how can this person do the job? Most of them would say, to get assistive devices for that person who's blind, it's so expensive. And what we're saying is that, is it not a right? It's actually a right, as the Employment Equity Act does provide for Chapter 2 of the Employment Equity Act, does provide for reasonable accommodation to say every employer is he or she obliged to provide for reasonable accommodation in terms of assistive devices. So the other challenge was that employers would say blind people are not like applying. We don't get applications for blind people, which is incorrect because it has been declared that there is 2% in terms of the target for for people with disabilities, and visually impaired are part of that. So we resolved as the conference to say we'll continue to engage mostly government, we'll continue to engage mostly the private sector to make sure that visually impaired people in particular, because they are part of the sector, of the disability sector, they get employed. With regard to qualifications, make no mistake, visually impaired, they can study. They can study. We have doctors who are visually impaired. We have professors who are visually impaired. We have a lot of them who have studied up to master's level. But some of them, you find that they are employed at those entry-level posts. And that's a very serious challenge which was raised at the conference. And a clear resolution was made to say we must continue to strengthen our advocacy. We must continue to strengthen our lobbying so that we are able to engage employers, most primarily government, to make sure that also different blindness categories, you can say that for the totally blind and also who are partially sighted, they are also able to get those benefits, and they obtain those positions that are really strategic enough, because they normally say nothing about us without us. The more we get up to the director's post, chief director, and all those strategic positions, we'll be able to advise government, we'll be able to advise the private sector, because most of them would be sitting in those strategic meetings and give direction and guidance.
Thank you so much. That was Mr. Lesibana Movundlela from the South African National Blind Council, joining us from our Sea Point studios.